All right, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Nerd Nite in Madison, I give you Lee Bishop to introduce our first speaker of the evening.
Awesome, thank you. All right, who is psyched to be here, Chicago? Are you feeling good? Yeah, are you feeling good? All right, yes. Okay, I am here. First, I'm going to give you a little bit of story about this dude, Arrhenius. Who's heard of Arrhenius? Yes, all right, this guy, very classy, Nobel Prize committee. He's just like, I'll give all my buddies some prizes, but don't give these guys some prizes. Ehrlich invented chemotherapy, don't give him a prize. Nernst invented electrochemistry, the battery, don't give him a prize either, says Arrhenius. Mendeleev, the periodic table, don't give him a prize. So this guy, real classy, also married a former student, so say what you will about that. But anyway, also had contributed a lot to science. So this dude figured out what acids and bases were. Nobody knew what the hell that was before he did. So, I mean, obviously people came before him. But he also, telling chemical A goes to chemical B. What the hell happens in between? This guy figured it out. I did Arrhenius plots in grad school. This is the guy. And also, pure water does not conduct electricity. Pure salt does not conduct electricity. Mix them together, they do. Weird. He figured that out. So anyway, but the big thing I want to tell you about is the fact that this dude discovered climate change like 100 years ago, which is pretty nuts. And he was very excited about it. Like, so people were afraid of an ice age, which is pretty nuts. They were like, all right, we can warm the planet by burning fossil fuels. This is great because there might be another ice age. They didn't really understand like orbital mechanics all the way and how things really worked. So yeah, it just goes to show you kind of what a whole 100 years and lots of science will do for you. So pretty nuts. Anyway, without further ado, I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna introduce to you the next speaker who's gonna come up, and I'm gonna get out her bio because it's in my pocket. All right, get real. I've talked with this classy lady. She's gonna blow your mind. So one thing I actually know before I do this, if this will go, can we go next slide? My thing has stopped working. Next slide. All right, what I want to tell you about on the next slide, the title of this next talk is Christ on a Cracker, or these things I can't pronounce, Apophenia, Pareidolia, and Conspiracy Paranoia, all right? And so we want to have a contest about what is the better title. If you can come up with a better title as you are learning, as she is infusing knowledge into your brain, tweet it. I think it's Nerd Nite, what is it, at NN Chicago? What's the Twitter? Nerd Nite Shy. And this thing is totally broken, so we need to go to the next stage. Otherwise, Laura's going to be up here without any slides. Things are going to get weird. Slides happen at talks, folks. All right, so, but I'm just going to keep on rolling and introduce Laura. She is a preparedness hobbyist, highly skilled in making type 1 errors. Preparedness hobbyist, folks. She came up with that. That's awesome. Or at least I'm crediting it to her. So ask her after her second drink about the post-apocalyptic world. After her second drink. So without further ado, let's give it up for Laura Lanford. Yeah.
Well, that's a level of enthusiasm that I'm going to have to work pretty hard to match. All right, just making sure that this thing works. Excellent. So the name of my talk is Christ on a Cracker, which I didn't previously really use, but I'm definitely using from here on out. We had to drop both the conspiracy, because this is a 20-minute talk, so I better get cracking with it. So I actually did look for a Christ on a Cracker image to use for this, and I actually didn't find that, but I found Christ a whole bunch of other places. I found him on a tortilla. I found him on a pierogi. I found him on a fish stick. I found him on an oil stain, in the lid of a Marmite jar. Found him in an orange, and last but certainly not least, in the hindquarters of a dog. So all of these things are examples of pareidolia, which is the human tendency to be able to find patterns in noise. Pareidolia is the reason that we recognize both, there we go, pareidolia. It's a process of pattern seeking. I forgot I left that slide in there. And it's the reason that we see both, this and this to be recognizable as faces. It's also the reason that we find this interesting as well as cute, and why we think this is funny. So this is something that's active all the time. It's happening right now, which is the reason that when I show you the next couple of slides, they're going to immediately make sense to you. Ready? Rocks that look like people. Trees that look like people. Lakes that look like people. Carrots that look like people and people parts. And as I give you a moment to look at this truly spectacular example of Elvis and breakfast, Pareidolia isn't just about seeing people and faces. It's actually any time that we see something in something that it is not. For instance, things that look like owls. Things that look like ducks. There's actually a website called thispeanutlooksLikeAduck.com where most of these are from. And my favorite example of anthropomorphized pareidolia, the one that got me started in being interested in this topic, are belligerent, intoxicated octopus. The definition of pareidolia that I prefer doesn't make a distinction between seeing things where there is nothing and seeing things where there is something, because the biological process is the same, regardless of whether or not there's actually there. This is an example, and this is the definition that I like best. It's from the Skeptics Dictionary. Pareidolia can be defined as a vague or obscure stimulus perceived as something clear and distinct. How many ponies do you guys see on the left there? I've gotten 5. I'm expecting there might be another one. You got 6? All right, well, those of you who saw 6, come and see me afterwards and show me where the other one is. So this is an incredibly powerful system that's running in the background all the time. And it makes sense why it's that way, because it's been evolutionarily selected for. We're going to talk a little bit about why this makes sense. You are Nut-Tuck, hero of the South. Is anybody besides Tom laughing at that? Thank you, Alex. Okay. And you're out doing your hunt, and all of a sudden some stimulus comes into your brain. It could be a smell or a sound or something that you catch out of the side of your eye. And there are a couple of options in how you're going to assess that. There are 2 ways that you can assess it correctly. You can assume that there's something there, a predator, a bear, something dangerous, and there is something there. Or you can assume that there's nothing there and there's nothing there. There's also 2 ways that you can assess this incorrectly. Something when there's nothing, nothing when there's something. In statistics, these are known as the type 1 and type 2 errors. These are incredibly unhelpful as titles, though, so for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to refer to them as paranoia and obliviousness. So let's do some simple game theory. Our binaries in this case are there is a predator or there is no predator, as evidenced by our bears. So we're going to start in the top left. If in reality there is no bear, and you assume there is a bear, you're okay. If in reality there is no bear, and you assume there's no bear, you're okay. If in reality there is a bear, and you think there's a bear, you're ready for that bear. But if there's a bear, and you assume there's not a bear, your oblivious genes don't get passed on to the next generation. Because we have no control over whether or not there is actually a bear, it's turned out that our best strategy for survival is to always assume that there's a bear. And that's the reason that we have such powerful pattern matching processes. Pareidolia. All right, so let's step away from bears for a second and go back to faces. I want to talk a little bit about the biology. And while there's some controversy about whether or not all pattern matching takes place in the same place, we have a very good understanding of where face processing takes place. It's an area of the brain called the fusiform gyrus, which is hereabouts but inside. And the crazy thing is that last 2012, 2 years ago, there was an MIT study that when they were studying face recognition, they realized that there are two distinct steps when we look at a face. On the left side of the fusiform gyrus, we ask the first question, which is something face-like? And then a distinct moment later, there's an answer, which is whether or not it's actually a face. The reason that this is significant, or potentially significant, is that it actually it's potentially significant, is that the face likeness is a more important and more instinctive part of what we have to know before we ever get to whether or not it actually exists as a face. I'm going to show you a picture next. Take a look at it and see if you can feel both of your systems. It's about half a second apart as you process these two faces. So Daniel Kahneman, who's the author, he's a Nobel laureate in economics and the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, analogous to the two-step process in face recognition, also talks about two processes that we use for any kind of pattern analysis. The first one, system one on the left, is intuitive, fast, kind of knee-jerk. At the bottom, that WYSIAT is what you see is all there is. It doesn't do any kind of rational processing. That would be the system two over on the right-hand side, which is rational, slower, but mentally very expensive. It takes time away from attention, time away from energy, and so we try not to use it. So I'm going to show you another two pictures. I'm going to show you another two pictures to illustrate the difference in these two systems. What I'll expect that most of you find is that the first instant interpretation that your system one does is going to be incorrect. And then a second later, you're going to have to think about what's happening. And then you'll be able to, the system two is going to come online and think about why these pictures look like they do. When you get it, just raise your hand just so I can sort of give people enough time. Ready? Excellent. So could you all tell the difference between the first and second? Okay, excellent. So because it's so expensive to use System 2, we try not to use it very much and to only bring it online when we need to. And so one of the ways that we do that is by using heuristics. So heuristics are basically, why are you laughing? Information processing shortcuts that we use, which are things that are usually right, usually somewhat accurate, but much faster than what we do otherwise. Unfortunately, it also makes us much more susceptible to specific cognitive processing errors. There's a whole bunch of them, and this isn't a long enough talk for me to be able to go into them, but I would like to touch on two of them because they're particularly relevant. The first one is innumeracy, right here, which is basically mathematical illiteracy, specifically something called the law of large numbers. We're very bad at probability, the way that we think about things. We think in binary and not in whether or not something is likely to happen. Frank Ramsey is a mathematician from Britain that did a theory that I'm not going to go into, except to say that he said in a large enough or complex enough system, you're going to find patterns. They're going to exist. And in fact, our world is certainly more than sufficient large enough to find some pretty crazy patterns. For instance, here's a pair of lips somewhere in a desert in Chad. I actually looked these both up on Google Maps, so those are accurate coordinates for where these things exist. This one's up in Canada. Just a head sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. The other thing that I want to talk about in terms of bias is anchoring, specifically a type of anchoring called priming your brain. So take a look at this cloud. Don't say anything out loud yet, but just see if you see what's there or what you think is there. And if you don't see anything, that's fine. Because now I'm going to show you a picture that in theory is going to make you see what the picture suggests that you're going to see. All right. So the first, it is Jesus, right? So the first time of priming is suggestion, where somebody says, you're going to see this because you expect to see that. It's what you're likely to see. And this is what a lot of con artists use when they're trying to get you to, anyway, that's a whole nother Nerd Night talk. There's a second kind of priming that we do, which is what we see what's familiar to us. For instance, what do y'all see here? Okay, well, at least some of you, that's what I see too. But the crazy thing is when kids look at this, they don't see two people, they see dolphins. And you might be asking, where are the dolphins? So I've highlighted them for you. So pareidolia, which is this amazing ability that we have in order to be able to make patterns, is also the way that we come to some great understanding. There's a fine line between being able to see patterns and genius. That's where these leaps of intuition come from. Newton with the apocryphal apple on the head, or Archimedes with getting in his bath and seeing the displacement of water and something about gold and silver crowns. Great ways for us to advance our knowledge of the world, to come up with theories of the way that things might work, but it can go very sour. And now we transfer from pareidolia into apophenia. Does anybody recognize the background on this slide? Awesome. Oh, you guys are properly nerdy. I really appreciate it. So apophenia is the abnormal attribution of meaning. So where pareidolia is seeing something in something or seeing something in nothing, apophenia is thinking that that means something about something. It was originally written about by Klaus Conrad, who was a psychiatrist in Germany, and he was writing about the onset of schizophrenia. That's where the term comes from, and it's because people tend to get more paranoid and see connections where connections don't necessarily exist. The problem with it is that one of the other biases is confirmation bias, which I hope is self-explanatory enough. Once you've decided what you think you're seeing, it's a type of priming. You're going to see it absolutely everywhere. And this is the basis between most pseudoscience and other kinds of spurious beliefs. When we see pictures that make us think of angels, or ghosts, or maybe the man on Mars, recognizing that those things look like those things is pareidolia. Thinking that that means something about the existence of them or what they're trying to say to you is when that moves into apophenia. By the way, this is actually back in 2007 when they went back by the Mesa on Cydonia, what that face actually looked like. So we've got this fantastic system where we can see patterns everywhere and in everything, but we have no counterbalance bullshit meter to tell us whether or not those patterns are meaningful. In fact, from a perception standpoint, we have no way of knowing if the patterns that we see are meaningful in any kind of greater way than just the fact that we happen to recognize them. Luckily, though, we have this fantastic tool that does allow us the opportunity to know whether or not the patterns we think we see are meaningful in reality. Does anybody want to hazard a guess?
Statistics?
Science. And that's what it's there for. This allows us to use the intuition, and the leaps of creativity that we can get through being able to create these patterns and set it up in a way that tells us whether or not it's actually a reflection of reality. How am I doing time-wise? Okay, well then this is going to end a little bit short because I just tried so hard. My last talk went 45 minutes, so Jason warned me that I needed to keep this one within bounds. I want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to leave you with this quote that Richard Feynman gave to Caltech in 1976, I think, a commencement speech. It was called Cargo Cult Science. And it talks about how your responsibility as a scientist is to be honest. And the hardest and the first step of that is to be honest with yourself. So since presumably all of you in the room are scientifically minded, I hope that the talk tonight has given you all a little bit more opportunity to see where you may be prone to fooling yourself and to not do so in the future. All right, so I'm going to open up for questions, but I want to tell you guys. Thank you. Thanks, guys. If y'all have questions, I ran short, so there's time. And for every question that y'all ask, I have an example of some inanimate object that looks like something else. Well, you're going to have to ask a question to find out. Yes, ma'am.
Is there adaptivity of seeing meaning where there isn't meaning, as opposed to just like recognizing it, but then believing it's meaning?
Oh, it's not a mistake. It's actually a fin. Sorry.
Is there any adaptive?
I have to repeat your question so they can understand it.
Keep talking.
To make sure that I understood what you were asking, you said, is this just a mistake of evolution, or
Or is there something adaptive to believing there's meaning when there is no?
or is there something adaptive to believing there's meaning when there's not? There's absolutely adaptive advantage to assuming that something is when it's not. It makes a lot more sense when you're talking about being eaten by a bear. It makes a lot less sense when you're trying to figure out something like, say, physics, where whatever you decide is the truth actually has a bearing on reality, or whether that reality, on your understanding of reality.
Show me the picture.
All right, so here's my first one. That is the Old Man Winter. And one of the first ones that just truly stunned me. I mean, that's a pretty solid piece of art right there, nature. Thanks. All right. Yes, sir.
If our brains can't be tricked, can we actually make a mental decision to trick ourselves to be better off?
The question is, if our brains can be tricked, can we trick ourselves? Can we trick ourselves into being better off? Is that an accurate representation? Absolutely. In fact, there's a whole corner of the internet about brain hacking and about how to make your life better by making your brain think what you want it to think. Okay, sir? I believe the question is assigning more complex meaning to something part of the same process? Is that accurate? That's precisely the point when it moves from recognition into ascribing meaning. So that's the line between Pareidolia and Apophenia, which, again, when we're talking about bears on the plains, doesn't really have much of a downside, but definitely causes more significant issues when it has other ramifications in life. I actually don't know what order these are in, so I get to be surprised every time I switch to the next one. Let me go to this side of the room, I'll come back. Yes, sir.
Century ago, people looked at the dust and the patterns of Mars and thought there were canals. Now other people looked at them and said there must be there are people there. Is this an example of what you're talking about?
It was people once looked at Mars and they saw a series of patterns that looked like canals, interpret them as canals, and they decided that that meant there was people on Mars. And he's asking if this is an example of this. Absolutely.
It's easy to see, visual and to imagine auditory examples of this, where you see something that looks like something, or hear something that looks like something, that sounds like something else. Are there any senses that aren't subject?
There are some senses. I'm sorry. It's very easy to see visually, and he can understand where auditorily you would be able to make these incorrect assumptions. Are there other senses that aren't as prone to it? I think that it depends a lot on what level of leeway your brain has in interpreting what something is. If you think about taste, for instance, and you're at a wine tasting, and you hand somebody something and you say, this is a rich earthy red with hints of olive and nutmeg and just a little bit of like winey with an H in this case, exotic, dusty backbone. I don't know how people talk about wine. And so you have a taste of this wine, you go, oh my God, I really taste those olives. So that would be an example where the priming and the suggestion makes you more likely to recognize those things. Is that an adequate answer?
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. Oh, I love this one. Yes, sir. Is this the same mechanism as anthropomorphization? And yes, it is. This one actually has a follow-up slide, so if somebody has one more question, you probably want to see it. Oh, I have one over here.
I was just curious with the priming concept, is that the psychology behind like subliminal marketing? Is that what people kind of study? You mentioned a talk about con artists, and in my opinion, that's kind of creepy, but
The question was, is this the same kind of psychology behind something like subliminal marketing or other kind of techniques along these lines? It is in theory, but subliminal advertising actually totally doesn't work because when we applied science to it, no difference. But yes, other than that, that is a lot of the idea behind it. It's used most often, well, I'll do a whole talk on this one of these days. Wait, one more. Okay.
Laura Lanford, wait, don't you go anywhere. That was awesome. All right, so we only got one entry, so I guess he wins automatically for alternative titles to your talk. Lee Bishop sent Lee sent it. Oh, there he is. The lights. Pleasant, Paranoia, and Pix. 3 X's. So all right, so we're accepting. Tweeted to @NerdNite Chai, us, alternative titles to the next 2 talks also. Wow. Hi. You're so cute. Stop. We don't have to go through them all. Laura Lanford, everybody. The roof also knows that you have 15 minutes before our next talk starts, so go get your drinks. Go.